Good morning, everyone. Warm welcome to you to our first Level Up Webinar Wednesday for 2024. Let me take this opportunity to wish you and your families all the best for 2024. We are indeed truly happy to be here with you. So for those of you who may not know me, I am your host, Audra Mitchell, Vice President of Learning and Development and General Manager for the Massy Learning Institute, MLI. And if you all could recall, and those of you who attended, in our final webinar for 2023, we encouraged you to end 2023 on a high, even if you did not hit all your goals. Well, it's a brand new year, and we all have an opportunity to press reset in our lives by setting goals to bring about positive change. For some of us, if not many of us, at the top of that list is healthy eating and healthy practices. A show of hands, right? You see my hand is up, right? I'm being very intentional this year. So in today's session, therefore, our goal is to help you achieve yours by focusing on nutrition and you. After all, there is a saying, if you don't eat your food as medicine, you will have to eat medicine as your food in the future. So one of our goals definitely is to ensure that it's not the latter for you. So as we get into our webinar, you are reminded to participate by posting your questions and comments so that we can have a really engaging session. And please look out for a recording of this webinar, which can be found on our website and YouTube channel. So without further ado, let me welcome and introduce today's speaker, Miss Victoria Cox. So Victoria is a Canadian-trained registered dietitian who returned home to Barbados in 2016 and has since established a private practice while also working on the multidisciplinary team as a contracted clinician, right, with the Barbados Diabetes Foundation. Victoria works with both adults and children and has a passion for helping others develop a healthy relationship with food while using medical nutrition therapy as a means to promote health and prevent or manage various chronic diseases. So much of Victoria's clinical focus is on diabetes mellitus, types 1 and 2, and polycystic ovary syndrome. Victoria also enjoys focusing on the fun and practical side of nutrition. So you see, nutrition can be fun and practical, and I know Victoria will tell us more about that. Therefore, eating healthy foods that are enjoyable, affordable, and satisfying, taking advantage of nutrition to fuel her love for functional fitness workouts and running. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I warmly welcome Victoria. Victoria, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you. I hope I am unmuted.
Yes.
And yes, okay, great. Let me go ahead and get the presentation going. Alrighty, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. And yes, today we will be talking about the topic, starting the new year, right, nutrition and you. So it's a timely topic really, because everybody tends to, as you say, set goals and think about bettering themselves in the new year. I was already introduced, so you got everything spot on. I am a Bajan, but I trained in Canada and I've been back here since about 2016. And while I work on a lot of different areas, I would say diabetes, cardiovascular disease, polycystic ovary syndrome, and weight management kind of take up most of my daily conversations. So we can pretty much jump on right into the topic at hand. So being that it is, early in January of a new year, I tend to see, not just me, everybody, we tend to see a lot of, new year, new me, people kind of setting all sorts of health and wellness goals, which is great. I have, no problem with people wanting to take advantage of that new year motivation. But I guess the trend that we tend to see is that people set quite extreme goals, I suppose. And when that comes to nutrition, it usually means some kind of diet as opposed to just general healthy eating. So, and I get it, it's very tempting. We tend to be sort of all or nothing a lot of the time. And it is tempting to say, okay, it's new year, new me. So I want to lose some weight or gain some muscle or get my blood sugar under control or whatever the case is, which is wonderful. But sometimes going to a really extreme diet, it can be, I suppose the concern is always that it can end up being quite short-lived, right? So, I mean, there's all sorts of diets and trends out there at the moment. So for example, the keto diet, that's been around for a hot minute, but I still find, it's still a pretty popular one. A lot of people nowadays are into trying intermittent fasting. I also find that sort of plant-based or vegan type diets are becoming more and more popular. But then on the flip side, you've got people trying the carnivore diet, so eating all meat. Then just sometimes people wanting to lose weight, but going into sort of an extreme calorie deficit. So hardly eating anything at all. And then there's the juices and the cleanses, and then just a lot of intense, very specific supplementation, all sorts of little capsules and green powders and all these sorts of things. And again, I don't take specific issue with these things, well, except for extreme calorie deficit, it's almost never a good thing. But I think a lot of times we forget to look at the big picture of just general health. It's a lot more appealing in that moment to say, oh, okay, I'm going to go and buy all these supplements and have this fancy green juice in the morning and that'll fix all my problems, right? But it's sort of taking a step back and like, well, am I adopting any kind of baseline healthy patterns before I jump into something so extreme meaning that it's probably difficult to sustain. So I know this sounds kind of boring, and that's unfortunately kind of what I lean into, to be honest. So before somebody starts taking interest in intermittent fasting or taking certain types of supplements, I just kind of want to get an idea, well, before you jump to something so intense, do you eat fruits? Do you eat vegetables? Do you eat them every day? The boring stuff, right? Do you prepare most of your food, or do you find yourself buying food all of the time? Do you drink water? Are your meals overall nutritionally balanced? Because as tempting as it is to hone in on some kind of little nitpicky detail, the fact is these little specific things don't fix your overall pattern of eating. So having some fancy green juice every day isn't going to override issues if you don't eat vegetables and fruits. Let's see. So as I said, unfortunately, it tends to be a little bit on the boring side, but I would overall first ask the question of, okay, well, do you eat as stands a healthy, balanced diet? Because going to these sort of extreme diets is not gonna fix the issue. So sure, you may partake in intermittent fasting, but if what you're eating during your eating window isn't nutritious, there's still going to be issues there. So healthy, balanced diet. To be honest, I kind of take, not issue, but the word healthy is nuanced, because what may be healthy for one person may not be that healthy for another person. So I'll tend to just focus on the definition of a balanced diet, and then we'll layer some things on top of there in terms of, kind of get it going in a direction that may be of interest to you specifically. Because a healthy diet, for example, I may say, oh, well, fruits are healthy. And I agree with that as a general statement, but I work with a lot of people who have diabetes. And, mango season is the bane of my existence, because people eat 5 mangoes in a row. And if you have diabetes and you do that, chances are it's going to spike your blood sugar really, really high. So it's not necessarily enough to say healthy. Is it healthy for you depending on your goals? But taking a step back, are your meals balanced, right? And this is super basic, but I tend to say a balanced meal has got 3 components. we're starting basic. Some kind of protein, some kind of carbohydrate or starch, and ideally vegetables, but also maybe fruits. So just a 1, 2, 3. Of course, we're going to start layering because balance alone isn't everything. It's got to be, I suppose, back to that idea of healthy or of high nutritional value, I suppose. Because if I say to somebody, right, a balanced meal has a carbohydrate, a protein, and some veg, then someone would say, all right, if I go to a fast food restaurant and order some fried chicken, some French fries, and coleslaw, that's ticking off 1, 2, 3. But of course, we know that from a quality perspective, that's not going to do the trick. So healthy from a general sense, so not looking at it through a specific lens of this person has diabetes, this person wants to specifically lose weight or gain muscle, whatever the case is, just generally considered healthy or nutritious, high quality foods, whatever you want to call it. My baseline take on that is going to be, okay, we want to be eating mostly whole foods. What I mean by that is like single ingredient foods, right? So sweet potato, broccoli, fish, chicken, as opposed to some kind of, highly processed, ready to eat meal, or even certain types of snacky foods that have many, many ingredients. We want to mostly do whole foods and minimally processed foods. So foods that don't have tons of added sugars, sodium, other types of preservatives. I'm not saying there's not a place for those because we're all human, but most of the time, right? And that also applies for mostly eating home cooked food as opposed to purchasing food, because at the end of the day, people who make food, they got to make their money, they got to get their food to sell. But what makes food taste good easily? Fat, sugar, and salt. So when people are preparing food for the purpose of selling it, those things are usually abundant. An increase in plant-based meals, and this is not me trying to turn everybody vegan or vegetarian or anything like that. Both can coexist, so you can eat meats and animal foods, but I also encourage an increase in plant-based foods. So again, fruits, vegetables, legumes, things like that, which again brings me to the last point, which is fruits and vegetables of different colors. So when we're taking kind of a step back, we're thinking, cool, before we get to all the fun, exciting, nitpicky details of our 2024 diet or lifestyle, asking the questions of, hey, do I mostly eat single ingredient whole foods? Do I prepare most of those foods myself? Do I eat plant-based foods? Maybe include some plant-based proteins sometimes. Do I include different fruits and veggies on a daily basis, right? These are our baseline goals that we want to start working on, that I would recommend anybody start working on. So just to kind of run through some examples really quickly, because I don't promote really restrictive diets or anything like that. So if we kind of go through our 1, 2, 3, and we start with, okay, we want to include some kind of high fiber starch or high fiber carbohydrate. And this topic, I'll touch on it a little bit more. This is going to be particularly relevant for anybody living with diabetes, insulin resistance, PCOS with insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, because carbohydrate is the food group that is digested into sugar. So just something to keep in mind. But high fiber starches, will include things like rice, sure, preferably brown, or at least add in some peas or beans with your rice, things like quinoa, your ground provisions of sweet potato, yam, cassava, things like breadfruit, green banana, plantain, breads and biscuits, again, ideally whole wheats or high in fiber, things like oats and barley and other high fiber cereals, and even pasta, again, preferably high in fiber, so whole wheat, or nowadays you can get sort of red lentil pasta and all sorts of other high fiber options. So there's nothing wrong with carbohydrates. They are our main source of energy, unless you're specifically wanting for a particular reason to follow a very low carbohydrate diet. It's not a bad idea to include carbs. It's where we get fiber from, keeps us going regular in the bathroom, fuels our workouts if you're exercising. But as I said, it is something to keep in mind that it is a food group that turns into sugar. So portion control is relevant, especially if you have diabetes or history or are at high risk of diabetes. Lean proteins, this is always an important part of the meal that I think will sometimes get left out. I would say the most likely component to get left out is vegetables, let's be honest, but lean proteins also get left out sometimes, especially at meals maybe like breakfast, and protein does a lot to keep us feeling fuller for longer. So it's important just for satiety, regardless of what kind of health goals you have. But for general health, I'd be saying lean is the key word here, lean and minimally processed. So yes, I encourage protein at each meal, but unfortunately not necessarily, you know, corned beef and hot dog. It's more going for things like home cooked chicken, turkey, fish, and I'm not against canned foods personally, you know, so tuna, sardines, canned salmon, things like that. If you're going to go the route of red meat, beef, pork, lamb, etc., I would, you know, suggest removing any kind of visible fat because these just have a higher saturated fat content. As I said, I encourage inclusion of some plant-based proteins in there. So it could be like lentils, kidney beans, chickpeas, soy products. So edamame, which is young soybean, or things like tofu, which I know is quite a polarizing food. And eggs. And then you can use sort of other more supplemental sources of protein, like protein powder, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese. Not that that's a particularly popular food I find in, well, certainly not in Barbados, but, you know, it is a good source of protein nonetheless. So we're kind of aiming for these types of proteins versus, as I said, sausages, bacon, chicken wings, those types of things. And then nobody needs the dietitian to say, hey, did you know vegetables are good for you? Everybody knows. It is interesting that everybody knows, but not everybody eats vegetables every day. So again, before we kind of suddenly think, oh gosh, I'm going to change my eating in 2024 from mostly purchased food and fast food to organic kale salads every single day. It's like, well, you know, before jumping into something that you may not like that much, you may find really difficult to sustain, how about just kind of going through and thinking, well, what are your favorite vegetables? What are your quickest to prepare veg, your preferred fruits and veg, and just start including them in some form or fashion every day. So they said, you know, the trend, you know, heading into 2024 is to start simple. And I get, you know, some people may be sitting and listening to me kind of thinking, gosh, this is kind of boring. You know, it sounds too easy, but I think it's a really interesting experience, even for myself, because I'm human. You know, I'll think about something that I read, oh, this is good for me, you know, whether it be exercise or food related. And you think, well, it's so basic. Like, of course that's good for me. And then you think, well, do I do that though? And if I'm not already doing that, well, if it's so easy, why am I not, you know, examine, I guess, what kind of has brought you to where you are and think, well, hey, why don't I drink only water? You know, why do I keep ending up having to buy fast food? So, you know, as I said, my most simple goals for somebody without having met them on a one-on-one basis is kind of, you know what, it's probably a good idea to ensure all your meals are balanced. So think, hey, do I have a high fiber carb? Do I have a lean protein? Do I have a veg? Portion size, you know, you can kind of go off of the picture, which is the hands method. So, you know, protein could be a little bit bigger than the image. They just have it in the palm of your hand. I would say it could be more like the size of your entire hand. The starch, again, an estimate is around a fistful. Some people may need a bit more, obviously, some people a little bit less. And then veg, two handfuls. The other way of thinking of it is you want the veg to be the biggest thing on the plate or flask or container, and then you starch and you protein to make up the rest. Drink your water. I, you know, find simple, again, is best. So try drinking a glass of water between and with each meal. Try as much as possible to avoid purchasing food or eating fast food out of necessity. And what I mean by that is, you know, when people say, oh, they end up having to buy lunch almost every day when they're working, I think that's not really eating out for pleasure. That's, well, I'm hungry. I need to eat something. I didn't bring food with me to work or whatever the case is. So I got to go and buy whatever is quick, available, cost effective. Oftentimes that's not the healthiest option. So I think if we can plan our days in such a way where we're mostly eating home cooked foods, that almost opens you up so that when you do choose to go out and eat, it is very much a choice. It's, you know, oh, it's the weekend and I'm going out to celebrate a friend's birthday. I don't go out often. So when I do, I can order whatever sounds good, whatever is most enjoyable, as opposed to eating out multiple times a week, every week, out of necessity, where you're likely to be taking in high sodium, you know, high fat foods, whatnot. And try and include at least one fruit a day as a snack. So I'm just going to start layering on a few things in the time, you know, in the time that we have together today. So we've done the boring basics, you know, what's a balanced meal? generally what I mean when I say healthy or nutritious, high quality. So let's say somebody's goal in 2024 is to lose weight in a healthy manner. Okay, no problem. All those things still apply, but this is going to mean that this person essentially is going to want to achieve a calorie deficit. Everybody's going to try and tell you that their specific way of losing weight is somehow better. Again, whether it's keto, whether it's fasting, whatever the trend may be. The reality is there are just creative ways to help people get in a state of calorie deficit. So take in less calories than they're burning. Of course, exercise helps with this, but realistically, I find the phrase, you can't outrun your fork is true, that if you're just trying to compensate by exercise alone and don't change your eating, weight loss, can be a lot more difficult or may not happen. So basically, you want to start taking in less calories than you're currently taking in or than you're burning in order to see weight loss. And you want to do this in a healthy way. So I find it helpful to have a really good understanding of which foods are very high calorie versus which foods are not, right? So having an understanding of which foods are calorie dense. Some foods are just naturally very high in calories. So even if you don't eat a lot of them, they're increasing your calorie intake and more than likely to contribute to weight gain or lack of weight loss. And what's really frustrating is this can include healthy foods. So this is why I said at the beginning, healthy is a tricky term because I may be somebody who wants to eat healthy, but maybe I specifically want to lose weight. So I decide to cut out my corn kernels or almond nuts, right? The nuts are obviously healthier than your corn kernels. They're probably higher in calories than the corn kernels too, though. So they're not going to help with my specific goal in that sense. So this is where things get nuanced, right? And so if you're interested in losing or gaining weight, understanding that fat as a nutrient provides more than twice the calories per gram than carbohydrate and protein. So all you need to take away with that from that is that all high fat foods are high calorie. All oils, even the healthy ones like olive oil, cheese, butter, margarine, mayonnaise, salad dressing, high fat cuts of meat, again, things like nuts, seeds, avocado. Those last ones, they're healthy, but they're high in calories. And that is something to be mindful of if you happen to be wishing to lose weight along your healthy eating journey, right? So generally, if somebody is looking to lose weight, again, first and foremost, I'm thinking, right, you full on want to avoid deep fried food or fast food, because again, think of all those oils. You take some chicken and potato and you deep fry it. So if they were X calories before, now maybe they're 2X calories, and you're not even getting any more food for that, right? But you're getting maybe twice the amount of calories for that. So avoiding anything deep fried, anything you may classify as greasy. So we're talking like macaroni pie or pasta and really cheesy, creamy sauces, processed meats, even being careful with certain condiments like mayonnaise, salad dressings, cheese. And while I wouldn't say, oh, don't eat healthy fats, it would be a case of eat healthy fats, understanding that they are high calorie. So if you like avocado pear, nuts, nut butter, like peanut butter is my favorite food. I love peanut butter, almond butter, but I know it's really high in calories, so I am cautious with how much of it I use as a form of weight management. So this is just a reminder, like as I said, oil is basically pure fat, so it's the highest calorie sort of food that we consume. So while it may seem nitpicky to say, oh, well, be careful how much oil you use to stir fry your food or cook your food, there's a big difference between a teaspoon and a tablespoon calorie-wise. So sometimes I would prefer to use things like on the right, which is sort of like a diffused cooking spray of just the oil so that you end up using a lot less. So preparation method makes a big difference. And then these are just some pictures. Obviously, they're going to be different foods available in the different countries, but getting in enough protein, because I said earlier, protein does a really good job of keeping you full. So getting in enough low-fat protein is also really helpful along a weight loss journey. So tuna, Greek yogurt, protein powder, sort of low-fat burgers of different types, things like that. They're just helpful little foods and can be snacks as well when it comes to weight management and keeping you not starving. All right, I will layer in then just sort of smattering in on a few different topics. Diabetes, if there's anybody, listening who is living with or at risk of diabetes, I kind of mentioned already, you want to get familiar with the food group of carbohydrates because all carbohydrates digest into sugar, even the healthy ones. So again, it's back to this idea of you're not asking yourself necessarily, is this healthy? You're asking, is this going to affect my blood sugar or not? This really would get quite individualized in terms of how much carbohydrate somebody should or shouldn't eat to avoid their blood sugars from spiking, but it can explain why I may feel like I'm eating a meal that's like healthy, like a soup. And say my soup has in sweet potatoes, some English potatoes, some yam, dumplings, breadfruit, whatever, and chicken and veg. I may think, well, that sounds like a healthy meal. And sure, I wouldn't say it's an unhealthy meal, but it's very high in carbohydrate because of that last point I mentioned there at the bottom, avoid carbohydrate combining. So if you have diabetes and you're eating this soup and it's got in multiple ground provisions and dumplings, all of those things are going to digest into sugar and unfortunately raise your blood sugar. So it's just something to really be mindful of, that we don't want to have lots of carbs or starches at the same meal if you're trying to control blood sugar. And then obviously my number one suggestion for anybody with any kind of blood sugar concern is to avoid sweet drinks, limit sugary foods, and be cautious even of natural sugars. So fruits, dried fruits. Natural sugar is still sugar, and it's not that you shouldn't eat fruit if you have diabetes, but you need to be very careful with how much, basically how much and what type of fruit you have. It's not fair, but you know, it's the reality of diabetes and sugars. So I just very quickly, I don't really want to spend, because I know I don't have a ton of time, and I always have this grand idea of talking about so much. Just to kind of show when it comes to label reading, you're sort of looking at carbohydrates. Sometimes, like the cereal on the left, which is obviously has no sugar added, you would think automatically, okay, that's going to be the healthier version than the unsweetened Cheerios. But you can see that for 2/3 of a cup, that cereal on the left only it has 43 grams of carbohydrate. The cereal on the right for 1.5 cups has 29 grams of total carbohydrate. So total carbohydrates is something that you would really want to be paying attention to if you're trying to manage something like diabetes, prediabetes, PCOS, etc. So, label reading, it's very helpful because some things will surprise you. And I've already kind of mentioned for sure, staying away from sweet drinks, managing fruit intake, and generally when you choose your starch, choosing ones that are nice and high in fiber and portion controlling them. Oh, I had a quick little image here of, or a slide here of some different kind of drinks, and it was just a question of if anybody has a guess as to which one has the most sugar. So like a passion fruit juice drink, then a mango juice that specifies 100% fruit juice, a very sugary coffee type drink, iced white mocha. That's a sort of dig at my husband because that's what he would drink when he goes there, and then a ginger ale. And I mean, the reality is all of these are full of sugar, but the highest one is actually the ginger ale. And I sort of do that on purpose because I have a lot of clients who will tell me, specifically people either trying to lose weight or with diabetes, so really shouldn't, to achieve their goals, ideally wouldn't be using sweet drinks. And they'll say to me, oh, I don't drink sweet drinks, just ginger ale. And I think, I don't know how ginger ale, who does their PR, but it's impressive because for some reason we tend not to think of it as a soft drink in the same way that we do other ones. So again, when in doubt, check the label of anything you're planning on drinking. If you see a number and you think, is that a lot of sugar? Is that too much sugar? I think it's helpful for just a reference point to divide that number by 4, and that tells you how many teaspoons of sugar are in that drink or food. And alternative beverages, this is always an interesting one because it's quite limiting, but you've got water, sparkling water, you can do infused waters, teas and coffees, coconut water, and then there are sugar-free or diet drinks. It's quite a controversial topic, so if anyone has questions about that, we can talk about that. But sugar-free drinks, the reality is, they're not going to have the effect on your blood sugar that a regular sweet drink would have, or on your weight, to be honest. I don't know how much time I'll have really to go through the rest of the other points that I was going to touch on, but I just from a cholesterol perspective, mostly going to be coming down to avoiding high fat foods, again, fried foods, processed meats, cheesy, creamy dishes, and actually increasing your fiber, so soluble fiber. Most people know this, even if they don't know that they know this, because everybody has heard that oats are good for lowering cholesterol. So if you increase your intake of soluble fiber, it tends to help lower sort of bad cholesterol levels through whether it's oats, chia seeds, lentils, chickpeas, and then healthy fats are also good for cholesterol. So salmon, sardines, flaxseed, walnuts, those types of things are some things you would want to eat more of. And I think it's kind of nice to think of healthy eating as something that can be targeted, those foods that you want to include more of. Healthy eating or nutritious eating or achieving your goal isn't just about things you should be eating less of. It's about things we want to include more often. And then I think hypertension is probably the last one. So it's not going to be a big surprise, but for high blood pressure, we really want to watch sort of the sodium and the salt. So whether that's added during cooking or in, maybe things that we're using like bouillon cubes, soy sauce, processed foods tend to have a lot of sodium, cheese, fast food for sure. These are things where you want to try and use herbs and spices instead of salt-containing seasonings, and limit processed foods, or if you're getting canned foods, look for the low sodium option. And thankfully, there are foods that we can include more often to help relax the blood vessel pressure and lower blood pressure. So high potassium foods like good old fruits and vegetables, magnesium-rich foods like almonds, lentils, chia seeds, kale, and calcium-rich foods as well. So if you eat dairy, that could be low-fat milk and yogurt, or again, chia seeds, sardines, leafy greens. So generally nutritious foods help to lower blood pressure. Again, very quickly, if you're looking at a label and you don't really know what to focus on, sometimes it's easiest just to look at the right-hand collar and use the percent daily value as a guide. So anything 5% or less is considered low, 20% or more is considered high. So for something like sodium, if you see more than 20%, you know, whew, that's really high in salt. So this example is really, really high in sodium at 90%. But if you pick up a snack or a food and you realize, oh, okay, it's less than 5 or around 5% sodium, that is going to be a low sodium food. And then I'll just sort of end with the anecdote that in sitting with the theme of going into the new year and wanting to set healthy goals, and as I said, I'm not trying to negate or slow people down from their goals. I'm just more saying, take a step back. Do you do the basic, boring, healthy things? And if not, why? And maybe we should start there. I will also say that I personally am a fan of healthy-ish, healthier, anything that's a step in the right direction. Because again, the problem with sort of extreme patterns of thinking is we think, okay, if I am not eating my gold standard healthiest meal ever every day, we tend to just completely flop back to maybe old habits. So it's, okay, if I can't have this perfectly curated healthy meal that I wanted to have, I could as well go through the drive-through and buy something. And it's, that doesn't have to be that way. I could, maybe I don't have time to grill my fish and do my sweet potato and my salad, but I have time to make a tuna sandwich, which is arguably still better than me going and getting ribs and chips, right? So it's just trying to validate the fact that healthier, healthy-ish, healthier by addition. So even if the meal, part of my meal is not that healthy, it doesn't mean that there's no point in adding veg to that meal. At least that is something in the right direction, right? And so this is a message that I find really helpful, especially as the year kind of continues on and maybe, we realize, oh, there's a lot to this and it's quite difficult. Yeah, it can be difficult, but healthier, healthy-ish, every day is a new day to try and add a little something in or try a new swap. And remember that it doesn't have to be all or nothing all of the time. Okay, and I think, right, that's about it in terms of the presentation. So hopefully maybe there are some questions or, discussion points. I know I tend to talk quite fast and race through things, but yeah, hopefully that raises some points for discussion.
Thank you so very much, Victoria. And I really loved how the point you ended on, right? Healthier, healthy-ish, it's really a journey, right? Because it could really feel like an all or nothing and I can just throw in a towel. So on that note, I'm going to hand you over to Cherise Braffett, who will be moderating our Q&A segment. I see we have comments and questions coming in already. And so, Cherise, over to you.
Thank you, Audra, and thank you, Victoria. Good morning, everyone. Okay, so our first comment, we have one comment so far, and it is the ginger ale comment. Hurt my feelings. It is my favorite soda. So that person shared their feelings regarding the soda comment. Our next question this morning comes from Allison B. In an attempt to increase fiber in my diet, I tried the shortcut of Metamucil powder daily. It paled in comparison to the impact of actual vegetables on my cholesterol levels. Why is that?
That's a good question. Because I mean, using something like Metamucil is sometimes, recommended. So even to say it's a shortcut, I mean, don't sell yourself short in the sense that it's often a genuine sort of recommendation to increase psyllium fiber and help lower cholesterol. But it's interesting to hear that it didn't do the trick as did just increasing veg. And I suppose that's often people's argument for increasing or getting your nutrients from whole foods, right? So why, if possible, I would first and foremost always recommend that people increase, fruits and veg, and for cholesterol, maybe things like oats and chia seeds, etc., before only trying a fiber supplement, because I guess those whole foods offer you more, they would offer additional benefits, right? So they're going to be high in antioxidants along with the fiber that helps to lower cholesterol, maybe in increasing veg intake as opposed to just taking a fiber supplement. If someone is eating more vegetables, maybe it's moderating what else is on their plate that might have been contributing to the actual elevated cholesterol levels in the first place. It depends also on how much of something like Metamucil somebody was, or you were taking in terms of sort of the dosage, because you may have just been getting more overall fiber from increasing the vegetables. Because it's not just the fiber intake. I mean, an overall healthy pattern of eating helps to improve cholesterol levels as well. So, it's probably a combination of things, but I think it's kind of an interesting experience that you had. And as I said, brings back the idea that before someone just thinks, oh, this greens powder is going to count for all my veg intake, I would want to explore, well, why don't we eat the actual vegetables first? Because that is going to come packaged with lots of benefits, right? I think there's another.
Okay. Thank you so much. Our next question comes from an anonymous person, and it is, can a vegan lifestyle offer enough protein if you are focused on weight training? Any recommendations?
It's another good question. And I feel like it, from a personal perspective, because I do a lot of weight training myself and have, sort of goals of increasing lean muscle. And I'm not vegan, to be fair, but I am mostly plant-based. I will sometimes still include fish and eggs. And you're right, takes extra level of thought to kind of get in enough protein that you may want if, as you say, your focus is weight training, increase in lean muscle, that sort of thing. So it is possible. And I was actually just working on something for someone who is completely vegan, and we were trying to get, I forget, maybe our goal was maybe 120 grams of protein a day. And she wanted to do it mostly from whole food sources, which is wonderful. I do find, though, in terms of recommendations, to achieve sort of that weight training level of protein intake that's usually desired, along with whole foods, usually I will make use of protein powder at least once a day. That's the reality, because you think, okay, well, one scoop of a protein powder, a vegan protein powder, can give you 20, 25 grams of protein very quickly, very easily, whereas, a whole cup of beans is not even going to touch on that realistically. Soy products, once someone doesn't have an issue with unprocessed soy, so edamame and tofu, and if you have it in your country, tempeh, it's a little hard to get in Barbados. I would include a lot of those. And personally, I eat a lot of, I would say I get most of my protein personally, plant-based wise, from tofu and protein powder and edamame. And then things like the chickpeas and the lentils, those are kind of supplemental because it is difficult to get a lot of protein from them. So I guess my answer is it is possible, but personally, I do find that tofu, edamame, and protein powder specifically are helpful with achieving the kind of protein intake you would need for wanting for someone doing a lot of weight training and on a vegan diet. So hopefully that's helpful. I know it's sometimes people want to do it without the powder additions, but yeah, it is tricky when you're completely plant-based, but not impossible.
Okay, great. Thank you for those recommendations. We have another question here regarding condiments, and it is, are there any healthy-ish condiments that can be used to make boiled or sauteed vegetables more tasty?
Yeah, that's, again, all good questions. Okay, great. So for sure, I mean, when I say the condiments, I guess the condiments that I tend to limit most would be sort of cream-based or like mayonnaise type condiments. But in terms of making veggies taste a little bit better, I'm certainly not against the use of salad dressings and vinaigrettes. It's more, from a quality perspective, kind of, making sure they're made with higher quality ingredients, or you can make them yourself. So like the usual kind of classic, olive oil plus an acid, so like lemon juice or apple cider vinegar and seasonings. That's more, for salads. As I said, if someone happens to be trying to lose weight, it would just be a case of not using that in excess as far as amount. For me, in terms of making veggies taste better, if I'm just doing like steamed or boiled vegetables, which sure are a little bland, I tend to use, there would likely be some salt in there, but the seasoning, that's everything but the bagel seasoning. So it's like sesame seeds and dried garlic and things like that. If it's roasted veggies, I like a little bit of balsamic glaze. There would be a bit of sugar in there, but again, it's not using an excess. So I think if it's either I eat no vegetables because vegetables taste bad and are boring, or I'm going to eat 2 beautiful cups of veg, but I've added a tablespoon of low sodium soy sauce to a stir fry or balsamic glaze or dressing, I think it's worthwhile to add, that condiment. As I said, it's mostly just the full-on creamy, cheesy, mayonnaise-y ones that I would limit.
Okay, thank you. They really do help to make the vegetables more tasty. We have a question here from Sasha. She states, I made small dietary changes and lost 5 pounds over a month, but during one cheat weekend, I gained 6 pounds. Why is it so easy to gain yet difficult to lose?
Yeah, that's a frustrating sort of experience that I think a lot of people can probably empathize with, but still kudos to you for making those small changes, over a period of time. That's definitely the way you want to do it. In terms of, like a cheat weekend and seeming like things, you can regain so quickly. I mean, it's usually multifactorial. So the classic things you're going to hear are, if your cheat weekend included maybe a lot more carbohydrates than you're used to, that tends to come with water retention. If it included saltier foods or fast foods than you're used to, again, there's going to be water retention. So, one day or even one weekend of unhealthy eating is very unlikely to actually account for 5 pounds of, say, or 6 pounds of fat gain. It's, probably mostly water retention. And I think the other kind of thing about like cheat weekends and stuff like that, and seeing that we've sort of regained a little bit of weight, is that it can be so disheartening that it starts this sort of vicious cycle. So it's sort of like, if I go out and eat something, go to an event or whatever, and maybe eat unhealthily, and then I weigh myself the next morning and it looks like, oh gosh, I've gained weight. That mindset isn't a healthy one for me. And then I may go on and just eat something unhealthy for breakfast because I think, oh, well, I've already ruined the week now with my regained weight. So sometimes it's also just the continuation. So for me personally, this is, again, more of a personal recommendation, like that I apply to myself. If I know I've had a bit of a cheat weekend, I will purposefully not weigh myself, not right away. I may give myself a week. I say, you know what? All that's going to do is put me in a bad mood. It is what it is. There's going to be some water retention, some bloating happening. I'm going to just get back to those healthy changes that you made over the last month as if nothing happened. And maybe if you want to check in on your weight, give yourself some time.
Thank you so much. Our next question comes from an anonymous person. They state, I know there were options within your presentation, but pictures also included turkey meat. Isn't that a processed food? And what is the narrative for processed foods in relation to lifestyle diseases?
Okay, that's totally valid point. So, I think in the world of kind of avoiding highly processed foods, which definitely is a something that I do recommend, and I did recommend. I suppose it kind of comes back to me thinking that all things fall on a spectrum. So the specific sort of, and I guess this is why it is a little bit not dangerous, risky for me to show pictures like that, because the specific like sliced turkey deli meat that I showed a picture of, so I know that particular brand is nitrate free, which is something that I would usually look for in deli meat specifically. So nitrate and nitrite free, because that can increase risk of things like colon cancer and whatnot. But I will admit it is still quite a high sodium option, so it's not going to be ideal for everybody. I think it's more, when we're looking for quick and easy options, if we write off all processed foods completely, it can just be so limiting that a lot of times, again, we just kind of throw our hands up in the air and sort of give up a little bit. So whether it's some nitrate-free turkey, like deli meat, or like a turkey burger or something like that, I suppose for me, the thought process is, I need something quick and easy that I can just rush home, throw into the air fryer or the toaster oven, and eat quickly. The turkey burger has a lot less fat than maybe the bacon burger from the frozen section. So it's, again, kind of like a healthier option. Is it perfect? No. Would I recommend eating it every day? No. But do I think it's probably better than going through the drive-through? More than likely. So there's a lot of kind of gray area, because, yeah, I do recommend minimizing processed foods, but I don't think it's kind of like the argument that we should avoid all canned foods, but I don't think that a can of sardines is on the same spectrum as a can of corned beef, if that makes sense. But yeah, there's a lot of nuance, and it would depend on your specific kind of medical state and stuff like that as well, if it should even be included or not.
Very insightful. Our next question is from Allison, and it is, what are some of the essential vitamins and minerals recommended specifically for women over 40?
So, I mean, the reality is, I guess in terms of that nuance of being over 40, it's not like the recommendations are not necessarily going to sort of just change like flipping a switch in terms of your requirements for certain vitamins and minerals. But I guess for anybody, but sure, for women as we get older, paying attention to things like, it applies to sort of most people, but you have vitamin D, which chronically seems to be low in a lot of people, but especially as we get older, things like calcium, B12, minerals, maybe like magnesium. I also just find a lot of women, especially not just over 40, but sort of certainly later in life, so maybe over 50, over 60, women tend to seem to be the biggest culprits for low protein diets as well. So it's kind of tricky, because I wouldn't necessarily say, I'm not sort of thinking of any very specific nutrients that immediately come to mind as a generalized thing for women over 40. I think because again, it kind of comes back to, general balance, which is not really an age thing. It's just a person specific thing. But I feel like, yeah, I'd be looking at calcium, vitamin D, iron, magnesium, protein as some of the ones that stand out.
Okay, thank you for sharing that information. We have a question from Hemant. Is it okay to use artificial sweeteners in coffee and teas?
Artificial sweeteners is always a controversial topic anytime I bring it up. So let's see. I don't personally have issue with artificial sweeteners. I don't think that necessarily we should overuse them, and there are multiple trains of thought as to why. But again, depending on your particular goals, so say somebody has, diabetes or any kind of blood sugar issue, where even a little bit, a teaspoon or two of regular sugar, honey, those kind of things are going to spike your blood sugar. And we don't want that. That's not a good thing. The fact is, yeah, using an artificial sweetener is not going to do that. It's going to sweeten your tea and your coffee by taste. It's not going to spike your blood sugar. If someone is looking to lose weight, it's not going to contribute to weight gain. So I am not against. I think the reality is, it's almost, I don't know if I would say it's unfortunate, but the reality is in our food system nowadays, you're often choosing between lesser evils, right? And so I know some people I speak to are quite anti artificial sweeteners. And they'll sort of say, oh, well, this person should just use regular sugar. And I think, yeah, but if that person has diabetes, that regular soft drink is going to spike their blood sugar. High blood sugars, we know for a fact, do a lot of damage to your nerves, your eyes, your kidneys, all sorts of things. That diet drink, when they have a craving for something sweet, isn't going to raise their blood sugar. So if you don't believe in artificial sweeteners or the use of them, then you're kind of just really limiting yourself to just water and unsweetened teas and whatnot, which is fine if that's your preference. It's a long-winded answer to say, yeah, I'm not against the use of artificial sweeteners in tea and coffee. And I think in particular, it makes sense maybe for people who are watching blood sugar. But I do tend to suggest an overall reduction in sweetness. So say, for example, somebody used to put like really sweet tea or coffee. They put like 4 or 5 teaspoons of sugar in their coffee and they switch to a sweetener. I would suggest fine, switch to the sweetener, but still try and wean down on a little bit in terms of the amount. So you're not always craving something super sweet, if that makes sense. So there's still a general reduction in that sweet craving, maybe.
Yes, very great. All right, we have another question here regarding eggs. Mm-hmm. What is excessive when it comes to egg consumption?
So I hope my personal bias is not going to come into play here because I like eggs. So obviously the kind of classic concern with eggs is the cholesterol, right? So egg yolks themselves are high in cholesterol. So for a long time, it was sort of recommended, oh gosh, only eat like, I think it was something really low, like 2 or 3 eggs a week or something like that. And then research sort of, over time suggested that eating dietary cholesterol, so the actual cholesterol in something like egg or shrimp, doesn't really have a major impact on your serum or your blood levels of cholesterol. It's really more just the high fat, like the unhealthy fats, the high fat foods, like saturated fats that tend to push up cholesterol. So, the war on eggs kind of lessened down a little bit from a cholesterol perspective. I'm trying to remember. I saw someone. I was speaking to another dietitian, and she was saying she wasn't from the Caribbean, and that whatever recommendation she was following was saying, I forget how many eggs a week. It wasn't as low as 2. It was like 6 eggs a week or something like that. But I can't recall exactly what sort of the formal recommendation would be as it applies to us. Certainly on a global level from a recommendation point of view. But for me personally, unless someone already does have really elevated cholesterol and we're kind of trying all the things to get it down, is maybe when I would sort of say, well, let's only do eggs maybe once or twice a week. But for an otherwise healthy person, I don't typically have a problem with inclusion of eggs, 2 eggs or something a day. It would depend on the context of their overall diet as well, right? But again, in the terms of I live in this world of lesser evils, to me, if someone says, shoot, I read that I shouldn't eat eggs and they replace eggs with hot dogs or sausages or cheeseburgers for breakfast, I think you should go back to the eggs, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Victoria. We have another question. Can you recommend some vegetables or legumes that would not cause a lot of bloating?
Oh, sure. So, well, if you deal with a lot of bloating, just off the top of my head, I would say, barring actually, like working with a dietitian or a nutritionist, if you're not already familiar, which you may be, you can kind of just do like a quick Google search of low FODMAP vegetables. So that's FODMAP, low FODMAP vegetables, because foods that are high in this acronym FODMAPs, they're just really highly fermentable, so they tend to cause a lot of gas and bloating, and they are present in a variety of vegetables and beans for sure. Now, sometimes with things like beans and legumes, it's just if people jump to increase their fiber too much too quickly, they get sort of temporary gas and bloating. But if someone is at all susceptible to, say, like irritable bowel syndrome like symptoms, For the legumes, they're all pretty fermentable. Now this is going to sound sort of strange. The canned ones are less likely to bloat you once you rinse them well, because if you soak them in water, so you can obviously do that with the dried, like lentils and stuff in advance if you want. Soak them in water or double boil them and throw off the water. That helps leach out some of the compounds that make them so fermentable. And it can sometimes be why if people, even though you're trying to be healthy and cook the legumes from dry, they can cause more gas and bloating than the canned ones. In terms of veg, off the top of my head, I'm trying to think some of the sort of less likely to bloat ones, maybe like zucchini, carrots, I think eggplant. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, whereas a lot of people have obviously issues with things that are more in the cabbage family. So cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, onions and garlic are a big trigger for bloating, which can be tricky because they're in everything. But yeah, low FODMAP vegetables would be, you could do a quick search of those, and that would be something that may help with gas and bloating.
Thank you so much for those tips, especially the ones for the canned foods. Our last question this morning is, how can people make changes in their healthy eating and make it more sustainable?
Make it more sustainable, which is always ultimately the goal, isn't it? I mean, I think there's a variety of ways you could sort of tackle that. Some of it to me comes down to not having the all or nothing mindset. And I mean that more from the perspective of, if you go into something with making changes and you sort of tell yourself that you have to be 100% on the ball 100% of the time, then that one time that you're not can be enough to sort of just feel like it completely chops you down, and it's no longer sustainable because you think, oh gosh, well, I've ruined it, I've messed up, that's that. And then on top of that, the classic things, you want to make sure the changes are relatively enjoyable. So I love food. I try and eat healthily, but I really like to eat and I like food. So obviously I guess I'm grateful that I happen to like to cook. So I'm comfortable in the kitchen trying to use different things to make food still taste good. But again, so as much as variety and taste is really important, I also think realistically, having some just really good baseline healthy meal backups are important. So say, especially for a meal like breakfast, which most people don't mind being pretty repetitive, it's like, come up with 3 breakfast meals that are high protein, maybe high fiber, that are going to hold you over, that you can make pretty quickly, so that on the day that you don't have the time to play and experiment, you've always got a backup plan. Again, sustainability wise, keeping things up, examine your food environment. Sometimes we'll notice that we're doing things and it's, well, I keep doing them even though I know that I don't want to do them. Why is that? So it's like, I'm trying to stop eating so many snacks and chips, but I keep eating chips. Take a step back and ask why. Are you buying them? Is someone else buying them? So looking at the food in your house and not playing this game of, oh, I'll resist temptation, and instead being like, does my environment support my goal? Because sometimes it's like we have this weird sense of, I'm gonna buy the chips just in case and leave them in the cupboard, but I'm not going to eat them. And then like when that dam breaks, we feel kind of bad and guilty about it. So examining your food environment and making sure it's supportive of healthy eating, which can be tricky if you live with other people. So I would say, if my husband is not on board with what I'm trying to do from a health perspective, I say, fine, we can have snacks in the house, but I'm going to make sure that they are snacks that he likes, that I don't really like. Because otherwise I say, oh, I'm buying the Cheetos for Jason, when really I'm buying the Cheetos for myself, right? So instead I'll buy some kind of snack food and stuff. So he's happy, he has what he likes, but they're not my favorite, so I don't really care. And instead I will stock up on healthier options that I do enjoy. So you don't want yourself to be hangry with no snacks at all, but you've gotten rid of the sort of tempting ones, and you buy the stuff that you do like that happens to be healthier, but you don't beat yourself up really badly by any means if you happen to go out and indulge on something either. So it's a lot of, checking your environment, checking your mindset, having to enjoy as well, because anybody can do something that they don't enjoy, but it's healthy for a short period of time. But can you see yourself eating this way in a year's time? And if not, it may be time to pivot. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Victoria. We have just one more question we would like to squeeze in, and it's from SP. and it is, which cheeses do you recommend? It is my Achilles heel.
Yeah, cheese is kind of a tricky one. I mean, I like cheese. Most people like cheese. It's obviously quite high in sodium, quite high in saturated fat, high in calories. So it is something I would often recommend coming down on a little bit. I can't say that there's any one specific cheese per se that I would recommend over the other. My approach with cheese tends to be, think of it as the sprinkle on top, not as the main event, right? So if you want like cheesy pasta, instead of having like macaroni pie or Alfredo sauce, you know, I would do pasta maybe in like a tomato sauce or something like that, and put a little bit of cheese on top. So you still get that maybe like little satisfying cheese pull or something of that nature, but it's not a cheesy dish, if that makes sense. I know I'm not necessarily going to have a cheese sandwich, but maybe there's a thin slice of cheese in my sandwich. So it's just sort of reducing the amount. I guess along those lines, in terms of specific cheeses, sometimes I will purposefully choose the really strongly flavored cheeses. It's not that they're necessarily any healthier, like I like feta cheese or goat's cheese, but because they're so strongly flavored, I can get away with using less of them. And then you can get a lot of times sort of low fat or part skim mozzarella cheese. So it is lower fat, so it's a lower calorie option. And if you're going to melt it, I mean, it's not strongly flavored, but again, it still gives that satisfying ooey gooey cheese pull. So a lot of times it's just kind of pulling down on less, not having cheese as the main event, but not necessarily not allowing yourself to eat it either. So it's kind of one you have to play around with a little bit.
Thank you so much for those tips, Victoria. And I will now hand back over to Audra. Audra?
Great. Thank you, Cherise, as always, for doing an excellent job moderating. And Victoria, thank you as well for these powerful nuggets you shared. I have to say, I am indeed motivated to relook my approach to my nutrition and really increase my commitment. You know, I was taking so many notes, you know, so I'm certainly also looking forward to the replay of this webinar when we have it up. And for everybody, the webinar will be available on the Massy Learning Institute website, on our YouTube channel, so we can all go back there and, you know, and just anything we missed, we have an opportunity to get back to that. So Victoria, once again, thank you. This session has indeed been enlightening. So guys,
Thank you.
We've come to the end of our MLI webinar Wednesday. On behalf of the MLI team and our IT production team, without whom this wouldn't be possible, we really want to thank you for making the time and for your active participation. Really, really great questions. So we've all benefited. So we again want to thank you for your continued attendance and your engagement, and your feedback is always appreciated. So again, when you go to our YouTube channel, please put your comments in, you know, and your feedback, because that helps us to improve. So we also encourage you to look out and sign up for all our upcoming programs and our offerings. Again, you can see more on our website, right? And please have a wonderful rest of the day. Keep safe. Remember to level up in 2024. And of course, keep focused on this nutrition goal. It is a journey, all right? At the beginning of the year. Enjoy. So bye, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.